In a small southern town, a black mechanic was framed for a crime he didn't commit, sentenced to 20 years by a corrupt judge. His daughter, taken at 5, grew up vowing justice. Decades later, she's a lawyer, armed with his diary and new proof, facing that judge in court. Her fight exposes decades of lies, frees her father, and sparks a justice fund. This is their story of loss, courage, and a legacy reborn proof. One voice can rewrite the past. The courtroom smelled of old wood and sweat, a stale heat pressing down on the packed benches in the small Georgia town of Millwood. James Carter sat at the defendant's table, his mechanic's hands folded tight, grease stains still faint under his nails despite the scrubbing. At 32, he was broad-shouldered, quiet, a man who fixed engines and raised his daughter Lena with a gentleness that belied his size. Now he wore a borrowed suit, too tight at the shoulders, his eyes fixed on the judge's bench where Harold Tate presided, 75, white-haired, with a face carved from years of unquestioned power. The room buzzed low, townsfolk craning for a look, black faces in the back, white ones up front, an unspoken line drawn. James's lawyer, a nervous young public defender named Ellis, shuffled papers beside him, sweat beading on his brow. The charge was assault, a bar fight James swore he hadn't started. But the white witness, a mill foreman named Roy Grayson, claimed James swung first. No one mentioned Roy's slurs, the bottle he'd smashed, or the blood on his own knuckles. In Millwood, that didn't matter. Judge Tate banged his gavel, the sound sharp against the murmurs. "Order," he rasped, voice like gravel over stone. His glasses perched low, eyes cold as they swept the room, lingering on James. "We've heard the testimony. Anything else, counsel?" Ellis stood, voice cracking. "Your Honor, my client maintains his innocence. He's a family man, a mechanic, no record. The evidence is thin. One witness, no weapon." "Enough," Tate cut in, waving a hand. "I've seen plenty. A man like him, trouble follows." He leaned forward, gavel hovering. "James Carter, you're found guilty. 20 years, state penitentiary. Sentence starts now." The gavel fell, a crack that split the air. James's breath caught, his hands clenching. 20 years. Lena 5, gap-toothed, waiting with her aunt outside, flashed in his mind. He turned to Ellis, whispering, "Tell her I didn't do it. Tell her I'll be back." Ellis nodded, pale, as deputies moved in, cuffs clicking. The room erupted gasps. A woman sobbed from the back. White folks nodding approval up front. James kept his head high, eyes on the door. But inside, something broke. Tate watched, unblinking, his face a mask. He'd ruled Millwood's court for 40 years. A king in a rotting throne. Whispers of payoffs and fixed cases trailing him like smoke. No one dared speak it aloud. Not here. Not then. As James was led out, Tate scribbled a note, tucking it into his robe, a habit from decades of secrets. Outside, Lena clung to her Aunt Marie, a wiry woman with tired eyes. "Where's Daddy?" she asked, voice small, her braids swinging as she craned to see. Marie knelt, tears held back. "He's got to go away for a bit, baby. But he loves you. Always will." Lena didn't cry, just stared at the courthouse, its white columns stark against the sky. She didn't understand, not yet, but the weight settled in her bones. Days later, James sat in a cell, the clank of bars his new rhythm. He pulled a small notebook from his pocket contraband he'd slipped past the guards and wrote, "Lena, they took me for something I didn't do. Roy lied, Tate knew. Keep this safe. I'll fight to get back to you." He hid it under his mattress, a seed of truth for a day he prayed would come. Millwood moved on, the case fading to a footnote. Lena went to an orphanage when Marie fell sick, a gray brick building where nuns ruled with stiff hands and thin soup. She grew up quiet, sharp, clutching her dad's memory, his laugh, his oil-stained fingers braiding her hair. The diary reached her years later, smuggled by a released inmate, its pages worn but alive. She read it at 15, alone in a dorm cot, and vowed, "I'll find the truth." Decades passed. Tate retired, a frail figure in a big house, his rulings a shadow over Millwood. James served his time, released at 52, a stranger to the world. Lena lost to him in a maze of foster care. But she hadn't forgotten. At 33, Lena Carter walked back into that courthouse, law degree in hand, her dad's diary in her bag, ready to face the man who'd stolen her family. The courtroom waited, its ghost stirring. The dirt road stretched long and cracked outside Millwood, flanked by pine trees that leaned heavy in the late summer heat. Lena Carter stood beside a borrowed sedan, dust clinging to her black slacks, her braids pulled tight against the back of her neck. At 33, she carried a lawyer's sharpness, dark eyes steady, shoulders squared, but her hands trembled as she clutched her dad's diary, its pages worn thin from years of hiding. She'd driven 3 hours from Atlanta, the city where she'd built her life, to this nowhere spot where James Carter lived now, a free man since his release 2 years back, though freedom hadn't found him whole. A trailer sat off the road, silver siding dented, a pickup parked beside it, rust eating the edges. Lena took a step, then stopped as the door swung open. James emerged, 52 now, his broad frame thinner, his hair gray, his mechanic's hands still calloused but slower. He froze mid-step, a toolbox clattering to the porch. "Lena?" His voice broke, a whisper against the cicada's hum. She nodded, throat tight, and crossed the distance fast. They collided in a hug, his arms wrapping around her, frail but fierce, her face pressed to his shoulder. He smelled of oil and sweat, like the dad she'd lost at 5, and she held on, tears held back but burning. "I got your diary," she said, pulling back to meet his eyes. "I know." James blinked, wet tracks on his cheeks. "You got it? How?" He stepped back, shaky, and she pulled the notebook from her bag, its cover faded, its words still sharp. "Tommy brought it to me back when I was 15. Said you told him to. I've kept it all this time." He took it, fingers tracing the pages, a ghost of a smile breaking through. "I wrote it for you, Lena. Tried sending letters, but they said you were gone, lost in the system. I didn't know where to look." His voice cracked again, guilt thick. "I let you down." "You didn't," she said, fierce. "They took you. Roy lied. Tate knew. I read it all, Daddy. I'm a lawyer now. We're going back." She gripped his arm, steadying him as he swayed, the weight of 20 years crashing in. James shook his head, slow. "Tate's old, Lena. Might be dead for all I know. And me? I'm out. What's left to fight?" "Not dead," she said, voice steel. "Retired, living big on Pine Street, and you're not just out, you're owed. They stole 20 years, took me from you. I've got evidence, Daddy. We're reopening it." She pulled a file from her bag, papers crisp against the diary's wear. "Tommy tracked me down last month, said, 'A guy from your block, Willie Reed, wants to talk. Saw Roy that night, heard him laugh about setting you up. I recorded him yesterday.'" James stared, eyes wide. "Willie." "Skinny fella bunked across from me." He rubbed his face, memory stirring. He was there when Roy visited once, bragging to a guard. "I wrote it down, figured it was nothing." "It's everything," Lena said, opening the file. "Willie's clean now, runs a store in Macon. Said Roy got drunk years back. Admitted he swung first. Said Tate fixed it for a favor. I've got the tape, his signature on a statement. And this." She pulled a yellowed note, edges torn, found in a courthouse archive by a clerk she'd charmed. "Tate's handwriting from your case day. Roy paid up, keep it tight. It's a start." James sank onto the porch steps, diary in his lap. "You've been digging all this time?" "Since I read your words," she said, sitting beside him. "I promised you at 15 I'd find the truth. Law school, every case I took, it was for this. For you." She touched his shoulder, voice softening. "I found you 3 months ago through Tommy. Took me that long to get the nerve to come." He looked at her, really looked her suit, her steady gaze. The girl he'd lost grown into a woman he didn't know, but felt deep. You're something else, Lena. But Tate, he's got Millwood locked. Always did. Not anymore, she said, standing. That video from another case last year, pregnant nurse, cracked his myth. People talk now. I've got Willie, the note, your diary. We file to vacate your conviction, drag Tate back to that courtroom. He confesses or he crumbles. James stood, slow, a flicker of the man he'd been. You sure you want this? It's a fight, baby girl, dirty one. I've been fighting since they took you, she said, eyes blazing. Let's finish it. Millwood loomed 5 miles away, unchanged, yet shifting, same diner, same cotton fields, but a new edge in the air. Judge Harold Tate rocked on his Pine Street porch, 85 now, bourbon steady in his gnarled hand, thud. His hair was sparse, his skin sagging, but his eyes still cut sharp, watching the town he'd ruled. Retirement suited him, quiet, comfortable. The payoffs long spent on this house, his legacy secure in his mind. He'd heard James got out, didn't care. Another file closed, another nobody gone. The whispers about his bench, louder since that nurse's viral stand, brushed off as noise. He'd beaten worse. That afternoon, Lena drove James into town, the trailer fading behind them. She parked outside this diner, its neon buzzing, and called Willie Reed. You still in? She asked, voice low. His drawl came through, firm. Yeah, girl. Roy screwed your daddy. Tate greased it. I'll swear to it. She hung up, nodding to James. He's driving down tomorrow. We've got 48 hours to file. They stepped inside, heads turning. Black mechanic back from prison, his lawyer daughter beside him. A waitress, graying now, paused, then smiled faint. James Carter? Been a while. He nodded, awkward, but Lena kept her focus, ordering coffee, spreading papers on the table. We start here, she said. Motion to vacate, new evidence. Tate's note ties him to Roy. Willie's tape nails it. James sipped, hands shaky. You think they'll listen? Millwood don't bend. They'll bend, she said, tapping the diary. Your words, Daddy. Truth's here, like you said. I've got a friend at the DA, young, hungry. She'll push it. She leaned in, voice dropping. I've waited 28 years. We're not losing now. Across town, Tate rocked slow, a neighbor waving from the sidewalk. Quiet day, Judge? Tate grunted, sipping bourbon, oblivious to the sedan rolling past Lena at the wheel. James beside her, the courthouse in their sights. She'd filed by morning, paper stamped, a hearing set, fast new evidence too hot to stall. The diner hummed with whispers. The waitress texting a friend. Carter's girl's back. Trouble's coming. Lena dropped James at the trailer, promising. I'll call tomorrow. Rest, Daddy. He hugged her again, longer this time, and watched her drive off, the diary on his dash. She headed to a motel, room 12, and spread her files, Willie's tape, Tate's note, her dad's words. The courtroom loomed. Same wood, same smell. But this time, she'd walk in with power. Tate slept sound, bourbon glass empty, but Millwood stirred, the past clawing free. Room 3 brimmed with people benches packed tight, standing room spilling into the hall, the air thick with sweat and whispers. Lena stood at the counsel table, her black suit wrinkled from a sleepless night, her braids still neat, her dad's diary open before her. James sat beside her, his gray eyes fixed on the judge's bench, his hands steady now, the tremble gone after Tate's muttered confession the day before. Roy paid. Mill boss wanted Carter gone. The crowd buzzed, reporters from Atlanta scribbling fast, locals shifting in their seats, a mix of curiosity and unease. Word had spread overnight, Tate's words leaking from the courtroom to diner counters, a crack in Millwood's old armor. Judge Margaret Holt took the bench, her dark robe settling as she banged her gavel once, sharp and final. Order, she said, voice cutting through the noise. We're here to rule on the motion to vacate James Carter's 1995 assault conviction. Evidence presented yesterday. Ms. Carter, anything to add? Lena stood, her pulse loud in her ears. Little Bean's memory, a nickname she'd once imagined for a child of her own, pushing her forward. "Yes, Your Honor," she said, voice clear. "Yesterday, Harold Tate admitted under oath he took a bribe to convict my father. We've submitted his note, Roy Grayson's lie, confirmed by Willie Reed's tape, and my father's diary as corroboration. This wasn't justice, it was corruption. 20 years stolen from an innocent man, a father, a mechanic who never swung first." Holt nodded, glasses low on her nose, her pen poised over a legal pad. "Noted. The state?" Claire Evans rose, her suit sharp, her voice steady. "The DA's office reviewed the evidence overnight, Your Honor. Willie Reed's statement, recorded and sworn, aligns with the diary and Tate's note. We've no opposition to vacating the conviction. Mr. Tate's testimony seals it misconduct, plain and damning." "Whoa!" A murmur rippled through the room, a man in the back whispering, "About time." Holt turned to the witness stand, empty now, Tate absent after hobbling out yesterday, his cane left behind like a broken scepter. "Mr. Tate was subpoenaed again," she said, brow furrowing. "Where is he?" A deputy stepped forward, voice low. "Refused to come, Your Honor. Said he's done talking, holed up at his place on Pine Street." The crowd stirred, a woman muttering, "Coward," loud enough to draw a glare from Holt. "Very well," Holt said, tapping her gavel lightly. "His absence doesn't change what he said. Ms. Carter, call your witness." Lena nodded, turning to the gallery. "Willie Reed." He shuffled in, 50s now, skinny, but clean-shaven, his store apron swapped for a cheap suit. He swore in, hands fidgeting, eyes darting to James. Lena approached, tape player in hand. "Willie, tell us what you told me." He cleared his throat, voice rough. "Knew James inside, good man. Kept his head down. Roy came to the block once, maybe 97, drunk, laughing with a guard. Said he started that fight, busted a bottle, blamed James. Said Tate got paid by the mill boss Roy's cousin, to make it stick. Heard it clear, never forgot." His words hung, the room silent, but for a reporter's pen racing. Lena pressed play, Willie's taped voice echoing. "Roy said he hit James, not the other way. Tate fixed it, got paid." The click of the stop button snapped the room back, gasps rippling. She held up Tate's note next, yellowed and stark. "This is from the sentencing day, in Tate's hand. Roy paid up, keep it tight. Handwriting matches his rulings, verified by the clerk. It's not just Willie's word, it's proof." Holt leaned forward, taking the note, her fingers tracing the ink. "This is damning, Ms. Carter. Anything from the defense?" Claire shook her head. "No defense, Your Honor. State concedes." The room held its breath, James gripping the table edge, his knuckles white. Lena stood beside him, her hand brushing his shoulder, steadying them both. Holt set the note down, her voice slow, deliberate. "I've reviewed the diary, the tape, the note, and Mr. Tate's own words yesterday. This court finds clear evidence of judicial misconduct and fabricated testimony. James Carter's 1995 conviction is vacated, effective immediately. He stands exonerated." The gavel fell, a soft thud, and the room exploded. Cheers, shouts, a woman in the back sobbing loud. James slumped, head in his hands, tears slipping through his fingers. Lena hugged him tight, her own eyes wet, whispering, "You're free, Daddy. Really free." He nodded, voice gone, clutching her like she'd vanish again. Reporters bolted for the doors. Phones out, headlines forming. Millwood judge's corruption exposed, mechanic cleared after 28 years. The crowd spilled into the hall, voices overlapping. Anger at Tate, pride for Lena. Shock at the break in Millwood's silence. Claire clapped Lena's shoulder, grinning. "You did it, Carter. Clean sweep." Lena shook her head, wiping her face. "He did it, keeping that diary. I just brought it home." She turned to James, helping him stand. His legs shaky, but his back straighter now. "Let's get out of here," she said, guiding him past the benches, the wood creaking under their steps. Outside, the air hit cool, the sky clearing. A small knot of locals waiting, diner waitress, a mechanic who'd known James, clapping as they emerged. "Knew you didn't do it, man," the mechanic said, voice thick. James nodded, words failing, and Lena smiled faint, the diary tucked back in her briefcase. Across town, Harold Tate sat in his Pine Street house, blinds drawn, bourbon bottle empty on the table. The TV flickered, news looping the story, his name, his shame, his confession replayed. He'd refused the subpoena, locked the door. But the phone rang nonstop, reporters, old cronies cutting ties. His hands shook, the cane still gone, left in room 3 like a surrender. He stared at the wall, a faded photo of his bench days curling at the edges, and muttered, "Didn't think she'd find it." The town he'd ruled turned its back, whispers now roars, his kingdom dust. Lena drove James to the trailer, the courthouse fading behind them. She parked, engine ticking, and pulled the diary out one last time. "You wrote the truth, Daddy, kept it alive." He took it, fingers tracing the pages, a small smile breaking through. "You brought it back, Lena. My girl." She nodded, throat tight. "Not done yet. They owe you more than this." She didn't say what compensation, an apology, something bigger, but her eyes burned with it. The courtroom had broken Tate, freed James, but the scars stayed, 28 years deep. They sat quiet, the diary between them. Millwood's hum, softer now, shifting slow under their win. The trailer glowed under a late afternoon sun as Lena Carter parked the sedan in the dirt driveway. James sat beside her, hands loose, the diary in his jacket pocket. Lighter now after the courthouse victory. Room 3's echoes lingered. Judge Holt's gavel. Tate's confession. The crowd's roar as James's conviction vanished. He was free, 28 years late, and the silence between them held a fragile peace. Lena cut the engine, glancing at him. "You okay, Daddy?" Her voice was soft, her eyes tracing his gray hair, his lined face. He nodded, a faint smile breaking through. "Better than okay," he said, voice rough. "You gave me my name back, Lena." He stepped out, boots on gravel, and she followed, the air cool with fall's edge. Inside, the trailer smelled of oil and coffee, a cramped space with a worn couch and tool-strewn table. James sank onto the couch, patting the spot beside him. "Sit." She did. Her suit creased, the diary's absence a relief. They sat quiet, a tractor humming outside. James pulled the diary out, flipping it open. "Never thought this'd free me," he said, tracing the words. "Wrote it for you to know me. You broke Tate with it." Lena touched the page, smiling faint. "Kept me going when I didn't have you. Read it in the orphanage, promised I'd find you." Her throat tightened. "Took too long." He looked at her, eyes wet. "Orphanage? Marie said she'd keep you." "She got sick," Lena said, hand on his arm. "Lungs failed, no money. Nuns took me. Got your diary at 15, fought from there." She squeezed, fierce. "You didn't lose me, I came back." James nodded, swallowing hard. "Tougher than me, always were." He grabbed 2 mugs, pouring coffee. "Tell me about it growing up, law school." She sipped. Words, flowing orphanage rules, Sister Ruth's books, law school nights. James listened, coffee untouched, eyes bright. "You're a wonder," he said, voice thick. "Beat Tate at his own game." "Not his game now," she said. "Ours. They owe you more compensation. A fund maybe. Your name on it." Her eyes burned, the courtroom fueling her. He frowned. "Got you back. That's enough." "It's not," she said, firm. 20 years stolen. We'll fix it for others, too." He smiled, slow. "You've got fire, Lena. I'm with you." They hugged, years peeling back. Across town, Harold Tate sat in his Pine Street house, blinds shut, bourbon bottle empty. The TV droned news of his fall. Judge confesses, mechanic freed. No calls came. No neighbors waved. He'd locked the door, ignored knocks, his cane still gone from room 3. "Didn't think she'd find it," he muttered, staring at the bourbon stain, Millwood turning its back. The diner buzzed, waitress saying, "Carter's girl tore him down," mechanic nodding. "Tate's done." Whispers grew bold, his kingdom dust. Lena cooked eggs and toast, their first meal since she was 5. James ate slow, then pulled a toolbox out. "Fixed a carburetor yesterday. Might open a shop," she smiled. "I'll help, got savings." Claire called later. "Settlement's moving, 50 grand, apology next week. You in?" Lena nodded. "Yeah, we're in." They ate that night, coffee mixing with pine air, the diary between them. Tate faded, his house dark, but James and Lena grew solid, a start in a shifting town. Thank you all for watching this video. Please comment, and let me know what you think about this story. Please like and subscribe to watch more great content on my channel.